I don't like people who believe this. Story about vacationing under chemtrails. We gathered with a group of friends for a weekend camping trip. Fresh air, nature, campfire, songs under the guitar, and complete disconnection from the city bustle. Nature beckoned us with its majestic mountains and crystal clear lakes. The route was planned down to the last detail. Tents were prepared, backpacks were packed. It was to be the perfect vacation. On the first day, we climbed up to the mountain pass. Everything went as usual, laughing, discussing the upcoming journey. Someone shared news, and someone just enjoyed the silence of the forest. The time was nearing evening, and as the sun began to sink below the horizon, the sky was remarkably clear except for a few white trails from airplanes flying at high altitude. We stopped in a small clearing to take a break when one of our group, a guy named Carl, suddenly stopped talking and stared intently at the sky. No one paid any attention until he spoke up. "You see those tracks? Those are chemtrails." We laughed, thinking he was joking, but Carl was completely serious. He went on to say that they weren't just airplane tracks, but something more. Chemical spraying to control the climate in people's minds, he explained, looking at us with an expression of confidence that made us all a little wary. Carl was usually the calmest and most balanced of us, but at this moment something in his voice gave away a serious concern. He began to tell us that he had been studying the subject for several years, reading articles and watching videos, and now he was absolutely certain that it was all part of a global conspiracy. We were all confused. Someone tried to interrupt him, bringing the conversation back to our camping plans, but Carl was relentless. He went into great detail, explaining that these chemtrails supposedly contained special substances that could affect our health and even our minds. His enthusiasm grew more and more intense. Surrounded by wilderness, far from civilization, we suddenly found ourselves drawn into a discussion we had not expected. Carl told us that he had brought special chemical protection gear for this hike, ranging from masks that he said were supposed to filter out harmful substances to some pills that were supposed to be taken to cleanse the body of toxins. We exchanged awkward glances, not knowing how to react. In nature, where there is usually silence and peace, this situation seemed completely absurd, but Carl did not back down. He became even more agitated when he saw that we were not taking him seriously. He assured us that the influence of chemtrails was a real threat, and that the government was deliberately hiding the truth from the public. Story about a world under reptiloid rule, reality or fantasy. Everyone has someone whose beliefs are out of the ordinary, but a friend named Andrew seems to have outdone them all. He was convinced that the world was ruled not by humans, but by an ancient race of aliens, reptiloids, who disguised themselves as powerful politicians and world leaders to gradually subjugate the planet. He claimed that these beings control everything from the world economy to social media. Usually we met Andrew in a cafe or a park, discussing everyday things, work, hobbies, recent movies. But more and more often, the conversation began to turn to his favorite topic. When news reports with the leaders of countries were shown on TV, I noticed how his gaze became focused. It was as if he was analyzing each politician, trying to see what was hidden from everyone else. See how his eyes twinkle slightly? That's a sign, he mumbled to himself, and I knew the conversation was about to take an unexpected turn. One day we were sitting in a cafe when a famous leader of one of the world's powers appeared on the screen. It seemed that nothing special was going on, a usual press conference, usual questions and answers, but Andrew tensed up and froze. "There, see?" he exhaled, pointing to the screen. I looked but didn't see anything unusual. To me, it was just an ordinary person talking about current events, but to Andrew, things look different. "It's a reptiloid. Watch how it moves its eyes," he assured me. From that point on, the conversation turned into a monologue about how the reptiloids had seized key positions of power. Andrew began to tell us that this alien race has been living among us for thousands of years, and their main goal is to control humanity. They are able to change their appearance, masquerading as humans, but sometimes the truth comes through in eye movements, in facial expressions, in behavior. This can be noticed if you know what to pay attention to. He claimed that all significant political events of the last decades were organized by reptiloids, wars, crises, global solutions. It was all part of their plan to create a new world order. The world economy under their control. The media, likewise. Every time Andrew mentioned reptilians, his voice became surprisingly calm and confident, as if he really believed it was all true. It wasn't just a belief, but an entire belief system that he had developed over the years. When asked how he knew all this, Andrew would start talking about books he'd read, videos he'd watched, and websites discussing these theories. He talked about some insiders who had uncovered this information and were now hiding from the reptiloids so they wouldn't be eliminated. It seemed that Andrew lived in a parallel reality where every event had its own hidden meaning, and everything that seemed familiar to us was part of a global game for him. At first, I tried to argue, to make rational arguments, but it never ended well. Story about the moon conspiracy. Can we trust those who don't believe in the moon? We all know about the historic moment when man first set foot on the moon. For most people, this event has become a symbol of the triumph of science and technology, a grandiose achievement of mankind. However, there have always been those among us who believe that it was all a carefully planned hoax. These people claim that the moon landing is the biggest hoax in history, and sometimes behind these theories is something more: doubt about the very existence of the moon. I first encountered this phenomenon when I happened to attend a meeting of a skeptics club. There, people were discussing all sorts of conspiracy theories, from UFOs to government mind control operations. But prominent among them were those who seriously argued that the moon landing had been fabricated. They made their arguments as confidently as if they knew something that had escaped the attention of everyone else. One of these people was a man in his 40s, with glasses and a serious face, who seemed to be the most active in the discussion. At first, the conversation was about classical arguments. He showed photos from the Apollo mission, pointing to shadows that supposedly fell in the wrong directions, and argued that this was a clear sign that the filming had taken place in a studio. There are no stars in the pictures, but the flag flies like it does on Earth, he said, backing up his words with video clips. These were standard arguments that I had heard before, which skeptics treat with a slight chuckle. But after a few minutes, the conversation took an unexpected turn. The man with burning eyes began to argue that the problem was not only in the falsification of the landing. In his opinion, the very fact of the moon's existence is also a hoax. He said that the moon was either a hologram or an artificial satellite designed to control people's minds. At first, I thought it was a joke, but no, it was said in complete seriousness. He started talking about ancient myths and legends where the moon was supposedly not mentioned until a certain time. In his opinion, this indicated that the moon had appeared later, perhaps as a result of some vast conspiracy. Just think, he continued, how can the moon be so perfectly round? Why is it always seen from the same side, and no one has ever seen the dark side? These questions became the basis of his beliefs. He spoke passionately about books where the authors supposedly exposed the lies behind the moon. These books suggested that the moon was an artificial structure created by an unknown civilization or by governments to control people. Such ideas seemed absurd, but this man was full of confidence. He claimed that the moon controlled our thoughts, influencing our psyche and behavior. And if the moon landing was fabricated, it was only because no one could ever actually land on something so mysterious. Story about 5G and the fears around it. When the world started talking about the launch of 5G, it was expected that this technology would change the way we thought about internet speeds, allowing us to transfer data with incredible speed. But along with the promise of a future full of new possibilities came shadows. People began to fear that 5G would bring something else. Some argued that it would destroy our privacy, others that it would lead to environmental disasters, and still others firmly believed that radiation from 5G towers would cause cancer. The internet was flooded with videos, articles, and blogs describing scary scenarios. 5G towers allegedly emitted harmful waves that could destroy body cells, weaken the immune system, and even cause cancer. Video bloggers with grim faces explained how radiation attacks our brains, stealthily destroying our health, and conspiracy theories grew like a snowball. I first encountered such a theory theory when neighbors began discussing the installation of a new antenna near my home. They seriously believed that the new 5G towers would threaten their lives. Some started to panic, discussing how they could protect themselves from radiation. Some were going to cover their windows with aluminum foil, and some even bought special protective devices that promised to shield them from electromagnetic fields. People seemed to be gripped by fear of an invisible but supposedly deadly threat. Gradually, rumors began to spread throughout the neighborhood. Some parents seriously considered taking their children out of schools that were too close to the towers. Group chats appeared on social media where people shared their fears and ways to protect themselves. In one of these chats, I saw a post where someone advised taping phones with a special film that supposedly blocked harmful waves. This fear, based on misconceptions, turned into a whole movement. People truly believed that 5G was a weapon disguised as a new communications technology and that it was slowly but surely destroying humanity. Every new video or article on the subject fueled the fire. One of the most memorable moments was a video where a man with a somber tone proved that infrared remote controls for TVs, which millions of people use every day, emit frequencies dozens of times higher than 5G, but for some reason no one seems to care. He showed graphs and figures, but people still continued to believe that 5G was deadly. I was at a family dinner one night and the conversation turned to technology. My uncle, who has always been fascinated by various theories, suddenly started talking about 5G with such anxiety, as if it were a matter of life and death. He talked about how somewhere in another city, people started getting sick after the towers were installed, and even claimed that there was evidence that trees were dying because of 5G. I knew my uncle had always been susceptible to conspiracy theories, but this time his fears seemed more than real to him. I remembered how as a kid, he used to scare me with stories about microwaves that supposedly cooked not only our food, but our brains as well. He believed that every new technology brought with it hidden dangers, and 5G was no exception. But this time, I found his stories particularly disturbing because they were about a technology that was supposed to be the foundation for the future of the internet, medicine, and communications. While my uncle was talking about how 5G was destroying our health, I was trying to find arguments to convince him otherwise. I began to explain that the frequencies on which 5G operates are well below the bands that are dangerous to humans, that our environment is already full of electromagnetic radiation, from radios to Wi-Fi routers, and no one has yet proven their link to cancer. But the more I talked, the more I realized that logic and scientific facts didn't work in this situation. For my uncle and others like him, there was too much confirmation of their fears, from stories from acquaintances to YouTube videos that were full of conspiracy theories. The story of chasing the horizon. It started with a video on YouTube. Quite by chance, on one of those long evenings when it was dark outside my window and my computer screen was the only source of light, I came across a video that stirred something strange in me. I'd seen videos like this before, conspiracy theories, arguments against the conventional scientific worldview, but this time was different. The message on the screen was that the Earth is not a ball at all, as we've been taught since childhood. It's flat. At first, I, like many others, thought it was a joke. How could anyone believe such a thing in the 21st century? But something in me made me watch the video to the end, and then another one, and then another. The more I watched, the deeper I became immersed in this alternate world full of doubts and questions. I've always been a person who loves to seek the truth. My childhood was spent in books and encyclopedias. I could not just take something on faith. I had to understand, to get to the bottom of it. And so I felt that excitement again. What if everything we are told is a lie? What if we actually live on a huge flat disk surrounded by a mysterious wall of ice? After all, none of us have been to Antarctica. None of us have seen the frontiers with our own eyes. Logic and common sense said one thing, but my heart and intuition were already pointing to something else. I started reading blogs and forums of flat Earth proponents. It turned out that there were more of them than I could have imagined. These people were sincere in their beliefs. They were sharing evidence, hypothesizing, arguing with traditional science. For them, it wasn't just a conspiracy. It was a revelation that opened their eyes to the true structure of the world. Photographs of a horizon that is always straight, refutations of images from space, doubts that humans had ever flown to the moon. It all became part of their picture of the world. But one thought kept me going. If the Earth is really flat, why hasn't anyone traveled to its edges? Why didn't anyone take a boat and swim to the place where the ocean supposedly drops off into infinity? It would seem to be the easiest way to prove a point. In one of the discussions, I came across people who were making plans to send drones to the edge of the Earth. The idea seemed crazy, but at the same time, incredibly exciting. Imagine footage that could change everything. A video showing the very edge of the world where our familiar horizon ends. Such footage could be worth millions and put an end to all controversy. Over time, I noticed that I began to see the world differently. Every sunset and sunrise I saw seemed to confirm the flat Earth. Every time I flew on an airplane, I caught myself thinking, where is this curvature of the horizon that science promises? Why can't I see it? I mentioned it to friends, but many just brushed it off. To them, it was ridiculous, nonsense worthy only of jokes. But for me, it became something more, an opportunity to look beyond the known, beyond conventional understanding. One day I learned about a group of people who were actually trying to organize an expedition to the ends of the Earth. They were raising money for a special ship, planning the route, preparing to answer this question once and for all. I even thought about joining them. After all, it was a chance to prove to the world that we were living in a great deception. But the more I became immersed in the idea, the more I realized that there were fewer and fewer people around to talk to about it. Family began to worry. Friends began to pull away. Every time I started talking about a flat Earth, I could see the bewilderment and slight anxiety on their faces. But it didn't matter to me anymore. The story of the invisible conspirators. I live in a small town, away from the big metropolitan cities, where life flows in a measured way without much upheaval. Here people know each other by name, greet each other on the streets, discuss the weather or the latest local news. There are no high-profile political scandals, revolutionary movements, or those who could be called influential in my city. My city doesn't make headlines, and its residents are ordinary people far removed from global politics and big business. And everything would be business as usual if it weren't for one thought that has been on my mind for a long time. I have long believed that the Jews control the world. I've been told this since my youth, heard it on the news, read it on forums, and encountered it in conversations. It seemed that this was not just another conspiracy theory, but something real that was present at the highest levels of power. Power, money, politics were all in the hands of people I had never seen or known personally. They were said to run countries, control economies, pass laws that affect the lives of all of us. And I, like many others, was sure that this invisible conspiracy was happening right now, over our heads. But the more I immersed myself in this idea, the more I began to notice one oddity. There were no Jews in my town. There was not a single synagogue. The nearest one was more than 70 miles away. I began to wonder, if the Jews really do control the world, why aren't they here with us? Why weren't any of the local politicians or police officers Jewish? Where is this control that everyone talks so much about? Every day I felt more and more forgotten. It seemed that my town was not within the sphere of influence of this great conspiracy. None of us felt this Jewish influence that I had heard so often about. I tried to make sense of it. Could it be that we've simply been chosen to be bypassed? Or is the control not as all-encompassing as it is described? Could it be that we, the people of the province, are too insignificant to be noticed? I began to look at my life differently. I saw no Jewish businessmen who controlled local businesses, no Jewish judges who made decisions in the local courts. The power in my town belonged to the same people I had known for years, simple officials and public figures, none of whom were Jewish. They didn't seem to be part of a global conspiracy, but according to all these theories, they were still under someone's control. But under whose control? I didn't see it. The internet was full of discussions about Jews controlling media, finance, international organizations. But to me, it remained just an abstraction. All these conspiracies seemed far away to me, somewhere out there in the big cities, in places where life boils and millions of dollars revolve. But here, at our place, nothing of the sort was happening. People went on with their lives as usual, going to work, raising their children, discussing local news and gasoline prices.